In 1994, a school bus vanished in Knox County, Georgia. 20 children climbed aboard. None ever came home. No wreckage, no tire marks, no distress call. Just silence, and then 3 decades of questions. But recently, when a buried bus was uncovered in the woods near Briar Hollow, something else came to light: 19 small skeletons still seated in their rows, and 1 seat left empty. Now a cold case has been reopened, and what's coming to the surface is darker than anyone imagined. Before we start, hit subscribe to help uncover stories they tried to bury, and make sure no name stays forgotten. My name is Monica Reyes. I'm a detective, cold cases mostly. I transferred to Knox County in early June, expecting the usual theft, narcotics, maybe a missing person or two from the 80s that never went anywhere. But this place had a different kind of quiet, the kind that felt practiced, like a town that had learned to forget something on purpose. Back in '94, I was just a kid. I didn't live here then, but even across the state I remember hearing about it. The bus that never made it home. Everyone around here still remembers where they were when it happened. They remember the names of the kids, what the weather was like, even the sound of the sirens that never stopped. But ask too many questions. People shut down fast. They say it was a fluke, a tragic accident. Officially, that's still the story. Unofficially, it became a local myth. A ghost story you didn't bring up over dinner. The stretch of road where it happened runs just west of Briar Hollow. 2 narrow lanes, rough edges, pine trees stacked so thick on both sides they blot out the sun by mid-afternoon. The locals call it the Hollow Route. Not because of what happened, but because of how it feels driving through it. Hollow, like something's missing. Back then, the man behind the wheel was Harold Nash, Vietnam vet, kept to himself. Drove the same loop every day for 17 years. He never missed a shift. Never had an accident. No write-ups. No red flags. 20 kids rode his bus that Friday, September 16, 1994. 2nd graders to 8th graders. Boys with skinned knees and baseball cards. Girls with jelly shoes and spiral-bound notebooks. A mix of farm kids and latchkey kids. Kids who knew the route by heart. And it was a normal afternoon, sunny, warm 1 week before fall break. The bus pulled out of Dalton Elementary at 3:27 p.m., right on schedule. It passed the cattle gate just after 3:45, same as always. A hawk passed overhead. Nothing out of place. But by 4:10 p.m., not a single child had made it home. At 5:03, the first parent called the school. By 5:27, the secretary phoned the sheriff's office. And by 6:15, deputies were standing at the entrance to Briar Hollow staring into a tunnel of trees that gave nothing back. No crash, no bus, no Harold Nash, no sign they'd ever made it past mile marker 42. Some said the bus must have run off the road. Others said it had been stolen, hijacked, even abducted. But no evidence was ever found. Theories piled up. Then dust. Then silence. Now, 30 years later, a construction crew was clearing ground for a utility project near Briar Hollow when they struck something metal. Not a pipe, not a tank, the roof of a bus. And that's when everything changed. It was late afternoon when the call came in. A construction crew clearing brush near Briar Hollow had hit something underground. They thought it might be old piping until one of the operators climbed down and brushed away the soil with his glove. Faded yellow paint, curved steel, a window frame. He radioed his foreman, who called it in. By the time I got there, deputies had already sealed the site. Crime scene tape barely held back the crowd of onlookers and reporters. Someone handed me a bottle of water I didn't drink. The sun was low behind the trees, casting everything in that strange amber color the South gets just before dark. The excavation went through the night. We set up lights, tents, generators. Fire crews sprayed the perimeter to loosen the clay. And just after midnight, the team hit the doorway. The bus had been buried whole, like someone had lowered it in and packed the dirt tight around it. The front end had buckled under the weight, but the rest of it was intact. Inside were bones, small, delicate, and still seated. Most were slumped forward or curled against each other. No seatbelts, no signs of trauma, no signs they ever tried to get out. I stepped inside after forensics finished their sweep. The air was heavy, not just with mold, but with time, decay, memory. The seats were stained cracked, some still holding scraps of fabric where shirts or skirts had once been. A few tiny shoes had come loose and collapsed under their own age. But what caught my eye was the very last row driver's side. That seat was empty. No bones, no hair, no dust imprint. Just clean vinyl that hadn't been disturbed like the others. And beneath it, half covered in black mold, was a green spiral notebook. The evidence tech lifted it out slowly, sealed it, and handed it to me. I turned it in my hands under the floodlights. The name on the cover was written in ballpoint ink, E. Thurman. Ellie Thurman. The girl who until that moment had never been found. Back at the station, I started digging. The original case file had been stored in a cardboard box, handwritten reports stacked between yellowed newspaper clippings. The photo on Ellie's intake sheet showed a girl with a soft face, eyes that didn't quite look at the camera. It listed her age as 12. Last seen Friday, September 16th, 1994. According to the file, all 20 children had been declared legally deceased in 2001. No remains were ever recovered, no wreckage, no confirmed sightings. The case had been closed out as an unsolved disappearance. A sealed chapter. But something stood out in Ellie's report, a note scribbled in blue ink at the bottom. Mother moved out of state in 1996. No forwarding address. And in a second hand written later, described as quiet watchful, last seen writing in notebook. I took the file to Chief Deputy Banks. He'd been a rookie back in '94. Still had the habit of calling everyone kid even now. When I showed him the notebook, he leaned back in his chair and just stared at it. I asked him if anyone ever found a trace of Ellie. He shook his head. "She's the only one we never recovered," he said. "No bones, no blood, nothing." I asked if he wanted to reopen her profile. He didn't answer right away. Later that night, I sat in my motel room with the notebook open on the bed. Most of the pages were water-damaged, ink-smeared corners, warped, but a few were still legible. Not math problems or spelling lists. Notes. Dozens of them. Thoughts crammed into the margins. Some boxed, some underlined. I turned a page and read the first clear line. "We're not dead yet, but we will be soon." Another I can hear them whisper when the bus stops. I think the driver knows. It didn't sound like a 12-year-old guessing. It sounded like someone paying attention. The next morning I met with the families. What was left of them. Some had remarried, some had moved away and come back. Most looked like they hadn't slept through a night in 30 years. We gathered in the old community hall, folding chairs, weak coffee, faint mildew in the corners. I gave them the facts carefully, one sentence at a time. 19 of the 20 children had been found. Forensics were working on identification. We would notify them privately once matches were confirmed. Then I told them about the notebook, about Ellie. Someone asked how long the children were alive after they disappeared. I said we didn't know, but Ellie had written as if time had passed. Her entries weren't from a single day. They were from multiple. Another parent asked if it was possible they'd been moved, not killed immediately. I told her we were investigating that. And then I said something I hadn't planned to something I felt more than knew. Whoever buried that bus didn't take the notebook. That means either they didn't know it was there, or they didn't care. That landed harder than I expected. Afterward, I went back to the records room, pulled the missing persons file for Ellie's mother, Janet Thurman. The last official document in the folder was a letter she'd written in April 1995 asking for a case update. After that, nothing. She'd sold her car for cash, skipped out on her lease, and vanished. A neighbor had reported that she seemed paranoid, claimed someone was watching her from the woods. Her apartment had been left in disarray, child's belongings untouched. I put in a request for a nationwide trace on Janet, cross-referenced old death certificates, psych admissions, hospital intakes, anything that might surface a lead. While I waited, I took a drive. The old grocery store off Raynor Street had been closed for years. Dust on the windows, plastic bags tangled in the weeds. But the security mirror above the checkout lane still hung cracked, tilted, forgotten. In 1998, a woman had reported seeing her missing son in that mirror. Just a flash of a reflection. It was dismissed as stress. Delusion. But standing there now, I didn't think it was so impossible. That night, I sat with the notebook again. Further in the handwriting shifted tighter, harder pressed, more desperate. One page read, "The bus driver doesn't talk anymore, but he whistles. It's worse than silence." Another, "They call it the Hollow Road. We're not lost. We're being reprogrammed." The next morning, I met with the state forensics lab. 19 sets of child-sized remains had been recovered. DNA matches were coming in. But the 20th seat, Ellie's, was different. No bone dust, no tissue residue, no sign anyone decomposed in that seat. It was clean, pristine, undisturbed. Someone left that bus before it was buried. I returned to the excavation site. The trench was covered now, black plastic weighted down with cinder blocks. Deputy Merrill met me with a clipboard. She'd pulled aerial survey maps from '95. There, faint but unmistakable, was a rectangular indentation in the soil exact dimensions of a bus, covered over by fill dirt during a failed highway project. No one noticed, but someone had. Back at the office, I reviewed Harold Nash's employment file. His record was clean military background, hired in 1977. But between 1982 and 1984, he took an unexplained leave. No job records, no taxes, no address on file. And then I found a statement buried in the 1994 case notes from a former student named Reggie Parker, who rode Nash's bus 2 years before the disappearance. "Mr. Nash sometimes took us the long way home. One time he said we had to make a special stop. Dropped a kid off early. Not at their house. I told my mom. She said to mind my business. That stopped me." I called the school district's transport office. An older man named Calvin still ran the records room. I asked for all route logs from '93 and '94. That night, I sat at my kitchen table, going line by line. Dates, stops, mileages. On August 29, 1994, something changed. A new stop appeared. No address, just a code, 54791. It showed up every day after that, until the day the bus vanished. I ran the code through zoning maps, parcel numbers, school records. Nothing. Then I tried it as a land deed. It hit. Parcel 54, 791. A plot once owned by the district sold in 1995 to a shell company. The location deep in the woods. No structure listed. But the satellite view showed a faint path. No official road, just tire ruts. I packed a flashlight and my sidearm, drove out alone. It was almost midnight when I reached the overgrown entrance, and I hadn't taken 10 steps before I smelled it wet leaves, rust, and something older. The forest was quiet, but I had the feeling I wasn't alone. I hadn't even found the hatch yet, but I knew whatever had happened to those kids, it didn't end on that bus. The road to the old parcel took longer than expected. The trail had narrowed to tire ruts halfway through, and the forest closed in so tight I had to kill my headlights to avoid the glare. The path eventually opened into a clearing just wide enough for a small foundation and a patch of broken stone. I circled what was left of the structure, just a slab now cracked down the middle, overgrown with vines. In the far corner, something caught my boot. Hollow. Steel. I cleared away a few branches and found the edge of a hatch rusted through at the hinges. No markings. No lock. I opened it. A metal ladder descended into a narrow space below concrete damp, barely wide enough for my shoulders. The air hit me immediately. Mildew, rust, and something deeper. Rot, maybe. Paper gone soft with time. The tunnel ended in a chamber, 15 feet wide, maybe. No lights. Chains still bolted to the walls, spaced like restraints. There were scraps of cloth in the corner's bedding that hadn't been touched in decades. On the back wall, etched into the concrete by hand, were rows of tally marks. Hundreds of them. Some crossed out. Some circled. And beneath them, scratched deep and crooked. They made us numbers. But I am still Ellie. I didn't sleep that night. I laid everything out on the motel bed. The notebook, the parcel, records, the survey maps. I kept coming back to one thing. The seat on the bus hadn't been empty by accident. Whoever left that spot untouched, whoever chose not to bury her with the others, either didn't know she made it out, or they wanted us to think she did. The next morning, I requested access to the county records office. Most of the old bus route documentation had already been reviewed, but I wanted to see who signed off on that parcel transfer in '95. It didn't take long. Daniel Harrow. His name was listed on the deed school board authority approved just 4 months after the disappearance. At the time, Harrow was in his 30s, listed as assistant to the superintendent. Now he was the county commissioner, the same man who'd been on every committee tied to the original investigation. I made the call, requested a meeting. I expected red tape, maybe a delay. But he answered himself, told me to come by that afternoon. His office was spotless, books arranged by height. A framed photo of him with his father, the former superintendent, sitting behind his desk. Harrow stood when I entered. Gray hair, steady eyes. A calm, deliberate kind of man. I introduced myself and laid out the photo. One of the stills recovered from the tunnel system, children seated IVs in their arms. He didn't flinch, just looked down, then back at me. "I don't know who they are," he said. "But you know what they are." A pause. Then children who needed correction, for their own good. I asked about Eleanor Thurman. His face tightened just slightly. "She's gone," he said. "They all are. You're chasing shadows." I stood to leave. He didn't try to stop me. But before I reached the door, he said one more thing. Quiet. Flat. "You're too late. The girl who walked out of that tunnel isn't who you're hoping to find." That night I was back at the sheriff's office when a call came in. A construction worker clearing brush near the original excavation site had stepped through a soft patch of ground. Thought it was a sinkhole. Turned out to be a shallow grave. Adult male. Wallet still in his back pocket. Driver's license identified him as Calvin Rhodes, the same man who managed the school's route logs in the '90s. He'd gone missing 6 days earlier, right after I'd called him in for an interview. I went straight to the station. Vexler was already waiting there. He hadn't been arrested. He'd come in voluntarily. Said someone left an envelope on his trailer porch. Inside was a copy of Rhodes's autopsy report. No note, just the report. "They're killing off the old links," he told me. "Anyone who remembers too much." I asked him again what he knew about Project Promise, what happened to the kids on that bus. And this time he answered. He said the program never really ended. After the lawsuits, after the public fallout in the early '80s, a small group of insiders, educators, mid-level officials, behavioral consultants kept it going off the books. They scaled it down, used school infrastructure, old shelters, remote land with no oversight. The children on Route 5 weren't kidnapped in the usual sense. They were redirected. Harold Nash was selected for his reliability. A quiet man. Trusted. But something shifted. Nash started questioning things. He got too close to one of the girls, Ellie. She never broke. Refused the drills. Wouldn't repeat the mantras. The other kids followed her lead. They remembered their names, refused to comply. So Nash made a choice. He tried to get her out. He was caught. Killed. His body was found inside the bus, misidentified as a student due to poor bone records. "You weren't just an observer," I said to Wexler. He didn't deny it, just nodded. "I gave her the notebook," he said. "Told her to keep it. I thought she made it. Thought she got away." I slid the photo across the table. Ellie standing outside the bus, expression blank, notebook in hand. "You took this," I said. He nodded again. "I got her to the edge of town. Told her to follow the tracks east. I was supposed to meet her the next day, but when you came back, she was gone." I watched his face. There was no certainty in his voice, only doubt. Later that night, I laid everything out again. Photos, notes, case files. Rhodes was dead. Nash was dead. Wexler had confessed his role. Harrow wasn't talking. That's when my phone buzzed. Unknown number. A voicemail. It was a girl's voice. Calm. Quiet. "Stop asking about me. He's still out there. He follows the survivors. I can't be found. If you're reading this, it means someone finally listened. But that's not enough. They need to dig under the school." Click. The next morning, I filed for a warrant. Dalton Elementary had been shuttered for years. Ivy-covered windows, roof sagging under its own weight. But I'd read the old blueprints. There was something missing. No mention of a basement. Yet in a staff memo from 1991, someone referenced routine flooding in the lower storage area. The records didn't list a basement, but I knew there was one. Behind the cafeteria's rusted service line, I found a door. Steel, unmarked. It opened onto a flight of stairs that led straight into darkness. And the air down there, it didn't feel abandoned. It felt waiting. The stairs behind that steel door led deeper than expected. Concrete walls on both sides. A single light bulb flickering above the first landing, but nothing beyond it. I had my flashlight in one hand, the other resting near my holster. Each step down echoed like I wasn't the only one there. At the bottom, the hallway opened into a long corridor 12 feet wide, lined with doors. No numbers, no windows. The walls were covered in what used to be motivational posters, now faded and curling from water damage. Phrases like, "Silence is strength," and "Correction is care." At first glance, it looked like an old administrative wing. Until I saw the cameras, old units corroded but mounted in every corner. On the third door to the left, someone had painted the words, "Hollow House" in red. The letters had chipped, but the shape of them still held. I forced the door open. Inside was a chamber that didn't belong in a school. Soundproof paneling lined every wall. A projector was bolted to the ceiling, aimed at a blank white screen. 3 child-sized chairs sat in a row, low to the ground, facing forward. Behind them, a corkboard was pinned with rows of photographs, black and white stills of children seated, sometimes strapped down, sometimes asleep. Some were wired to small devices, and under the red emergency exit sign, propped neatly on a rusted metal desk, was another green spiral notebook. It was almost identical to Ellie's. Same size, same faded green cover, but the name inside wasn't hers. Subject 12. Observe only. Do not reassign. Possible contamination risk. The writing was adult, sharp, measured. The pages weren't stories or observations. They were reports, schedules, behavior notes, entries logged after drills, before tests, during isolation. One passage stood out. Subject continues to resist collective behavior assimilation. Displays elevated recall. Attempts to remove documentation failed. Subject becomes distressed when separated from notebook. Team recommends termination. Another supervisor denies. Says Subject 12 will become control group. I stood there reading line after line, unable to shake the feeling that this wasn't archived by accident. Someone left it, intentionally, like a trail. Back at the station, I laid the two notebooks side by side. Ellie's the original, and this new one the file written about her. They overlapped in strange places. Dates, reactions, phrases repeated, but where Ellie had written in raw fragments. The driver won't talk. He only whistles now. This one logged her under audio response disruption, where she said, "They said we're being redirected." This one confirmed Phase 2 conditioning. It wasn't speculation anymore. These weren't metaphors. They were procedures. Later that night, I went back into the cold case files, searching for anything connected to the word redirection. In the late 70s, there had been a federally funded experiment called Project Promise, an off-book psychological program using immersive reconditioning on children labeled as behavioral outliers. Officially, it was disbanded in 1981 after lawsuits. Unofficially, it went quiet. But buried in the declassified report was a list of known sites. One of them was here, Knox County, Georgia. The name that appeared most often was Dr. Thomas Harrow, behavioral specialist, consultant, last known address, Homestead, Georgia. I called it in, pulled DMV records, cross-referenced utilities. The house was still listed as active, but the taxes hadn't been paid in 7 years. By morning, we had a team headed south. What we found there wasn't a home. It was a holding site. 2-story colonial, overgrown and collapsing. But the basement had been sealed behind a false wall, and inside were rows of old filing cabinets, folders labeled by subject number. Subject 12, Eleanor Thurman. Her file was thick. Handwritten logs, photographs, assessment reports, punishment protocols. Most of it was clinical until the last page. A note scrawled in red marker, "Will not break. Possibly dangerous. Observing." I sat with that line for a long time. If she never broke, then she remembered. All of it. Which meant that whoever had been sending voicemails wasn't just remembering. They were still watching. That evening, the GBI called. They'd finished identifying the bus remains. All 19 matched children from the original roster. Except one. One skeleton was adult-sized. Estimated age 60 to 65. Blunt force trauma to the back of the skull. Dental records confirmed it. Harold Nash, the driver. His remains were seated in the bus, not the driver's seat. A passenger row, so someone else had driven it into the woods. Someone else had buried it. And someone made sure Ellie's seat stayed empty. Later that night, a trail camera caught movement near the edge of the excavation site. The footage was grainy, mostly static. But for a few seconds, you could see a figure tall wearing a jacket, face partially obscured. Forensics enhanced the image. They got a partial. The left cheek was scarred. Old burn pattern. Facial recognition got a hit. Gerald Vexler, former school counselor, employed by the Knox County School District from 1992 to 1994. He was still alive, still in Georgia, living under a trust name off-grid in a trailer southeast of the county. I checked the address myself. It was an hour before dusk when I reached it. One generator, a handful of wind chimes, a scarecrow in the yard face sewn shut with twine. I knocked. The door creaked open. He stood in the shadows, half his face burned, one eye milky white. "You shouldn't be here," he said. I told him my name, told him about the bus, told him about Ellie. He didn't answer, just looked past me toward the trees. Then he said, "They told us the program ended." But it didn't. The hollow route was never about getting them home. It was about unlearning. Inside, he moved slow, sat in a broken recliner, never looked me in the eye. "I was supposed to observe," he said. "Take notes, monitor behavior." They called it educational therapy, until I saw what the Red Room really was. No windows, no clocks. Static pumped through the walls. Food as reward. Punishment as reset. He said he tried to stop it. Told Nash they were breaking the children. Especially Ellie. She wrote everything down, even after we took her pencils. She scratched it into the walls with her fingernails if she had to. I asked how she got out. He looked at me. Because she knew the route. The next morning, a manila envelope arrived at the sheriff's office. No return address. Inside was a photograph. It was dated October 1994, the bus still intact, and Ellie standing outside it, notebook in hand, expression blank. But her eyes, they were looking straight at the camera. I kept going back to that photograph, the one from October 94. Ellie standing beside the bus, her notebook in hand, eyes fixed on the camera. She looked calm, blank, like she'd already learned not to react. The more I studied it, the more I was convinced she hadn't escaped. Not really. She'd been moved. Somewhere else. Somewhere nearby. I went back into the transportation logs from the Knox County School District. Not the digital files, they didn't keep records from the early 90s in the system. I pulled out a dusty metal box from the records room, half buried under stacks of surplus manuals. Inside was the route supervisor's ledger, handwritten month by month with a blue ink stamp that marked every day's run. Most of the entries were routine, the same pickup times, same stop names. But when I flipped to September 1994, something shifted. On September 14th, just 2 days before the disappearance, a new stop had been added. No address, just a code, stop 21, X tunnel crate drop. It appeared again on the 15th, and then once more on the 16th, the day the bus disappeared. I ran the code through every department database. Nothing. Then I tried it against property records from the county assessor's system. Parcel 54-791. Knox County had owned it until 1995, then quietly sold it to a holding company. No listed structure, just coordinates. It was 5 miles east of the bus burial site, an area locals call the Dead Cut. County had tried to install sewer lines there back in the late 90s, but the project was abandoned because of unstable ground. No fences, no signs, just brush and slope. I drove out alone just after 7 p.m. No street signs. The dirt road barely held the weight of my SUV. I parked where the brush got too dense and went the rest of the way on foot. It took me 20 minutes to find the hatch. A steel lid wedged under thorns and roots half sunk into the hill. It looked like a drain or old utility access. No markings. No handle. I used my crowbar to wedge it open. The air was heavy, old wet, and chemical. I clicked on my flashlight and stepped down. A tunnel stretched forward lined with metal crates. Government issue. Each one stamped in stenciled paint, U.S. Department of Education, restricted training materials. Inside the first crate was a reel-to-reel projector and a set of labeled tapes. Module 1A, Authority Recognition. Module 3C, Parental Detachment Exercises. Module 5F, Fear Conditioning Audio. I opened another crate. It was filled with drill transcripts, repetition logs, lines repeated over and over in print. There is no home but the one we are given. Pain is not punishment. Pain is correction. Further back, I found a breach in the tunnel wall. Someone had chipped away the concrete with a crowbar or pipe. Beyond it was a narrow shaft, sloped steeply downward. The deeper I went, the colder the air became. The passage opened into a holding chamber, bare concrete benches, hooks lining the walls. 4 of them still had lines dangling down. In the far corner was a mattress, rust-stained and flattened by weight. Etched into the wall beside it were more tally marks. Dozens, maybe hundreds. Some circled, some slashed through. Below them, "This is where they forget us. But I remember." They made us numbers, but I am still Ellie. One day, I will walk home. I stood there in silence, the beam of my flashlight catching only what I allowed myself to see. It wasn't hard to imagine what the room had once been. It didn't need explanation. It told its own story. Back at my motel, I laid out the evidence across the bed. Photos, notebook scans, logbooks, route codes. The story wasn't linear. It didn't fit into clean timelines. But there was a through-line one that kept circling back to Ellie, not as a victim, as a variable, a complication. By now, I'd gone through her entire notebook 3 times. The entries weren't dated, but they evolved. In the beginning, she wrote in fragments. Bus stopped. Door locked. Told us not to scream. Kayla cried. He slapped her. Further in, the tone changed. More organized. We sleep sitting up now. Windows are too dark to see out. There's a sound every night. Like metal on gravel. Lenny thinks it's the hatch. One passage struck me harder than the rest. They pick us one at a time for the red room. You come back different. Or you don't come back. Then further down the page, he started calling us numbers. Not names. I'm number 12 now. The others forget. But I write everything down. I went back through the files. Each of the 19 identified children matched the original roster. One skeleton was adult Harold Nash. That left one. Seat 20. Still no confirmed identity. No DNA match. No personal effects. I requested a second analysis of the remains. Tissue samples. Dental markers. I wanted confirmation. Because if that wasn't Ellie, someone needed to tell me who it was. At 2:43 a.m., I got a text. No contact name, no signature. Just one line. You're standing where they buried my name. That morning, I drove back to the excavation site alone. Rain had started to fall, light at first, then steady. The trench had been covered again, but I pulled the tarp back and climbed down anyway. The space where seat 20 had been was darker than I remembered. Water pooled at the edges. Mud clung to my boots. And there, sitting just beyond the footprint of the seat, was a dry notebook. Green, spiral-bound, no mold, no water damage. Someone had left it after the rain had started. I opened it. First page. You think I died in that seat, but you're wrong. You found a body, not me. I never had a seat. They gave me a number, not a name. I became the lesson. The handwriting wasn't Ellie's. It was adult, controlled, pressed hard into the paper. One entry read, I watched them rewrite children. I watched them erase fear and replace it with obedience. But some of us didn't break. Some of us learned the rules too well. It ended with, they thought they made students. What they made was a survivor. I sealed the notebook into an evidence bag. My hands were still shaking. 2 hours later, the GBI called with the new DNA analysis. Bone structure was consistent with a preteen female. Estimated height, 4'11". Estimated age at death, 12 years. Tissue residue showed signs of long-term nutritional deprivation. Dental records were inconclusive, but bone growth markers matched known records for Eleanor Thurman. The remains in seat 20 were hers. Ellie had died on that bus. So who left the notebook? Who sent the voicemail, and who was watching me from the trees? It was past midnight when I got the location, 5 miles east of where the bus was buried. No roads, no signage, just a break in the trees where the ground dipped suddenly and the underbrush grew thin. Locals called it the Dead Cut. It used to be a county sewer project. They abandoned it sometime in the late 80s, unstable earth budget issues, that's what the old report said. But Vexler had pointed to it on a map, said that's where the real structure was, said if I found the crates, I'd understand. I parked off a dirt trail and hiked in with a flashlight and a crowbar. The wind had picked up scattering dry leaves around my boots. There was no moon. The only sound was the low hum of insects. I found the hatch right where he said it would be, half buried in pine needles and rusted shut. It took some work to pry it loose. The air that came up was stale and cold, not the kind of cold that settles overnight. This came from deep underground, like something sealed off. I lowered myself in slowly. The walls of the tunnel were narrow, lined with reinforced metal, government surplus. You could tell by the stenciling white block letters stamped onto the lids of the crates stacked on either side. Property of U.S. Department of Education. Beneath that, restricted training materials. I opened one. Inside was a projector. Another held stacks of VHS tapes, titles printed neatly on each label. Module 1A, Authority Recognition. Module 3C, Parental Detachment Exercises. Module 5F, Fear Conditioning Audio Only. The handwriting was precise, almost clinical. I took photos of everything. One crate was full of binders. Inside were transcripts of repetition drills, evaluations, session logs. Over and over, the same lines. There is no home but the one we are given. Pain is not punishment. Pain is correction. The deeper I moved into the tunnel, the colder it got. At the back, the concrete gave way to dirt. Someone had chipped out a narrow shaft 40 feet long, sloping downward into black. I followed it. The chamber at the end wasn't big, 12 by 12 feet maybe. The walls were lined with concrete benches, bolts where restraints used to be. A rusted mattress lay in the corner, covered in mildew and rot. 4 plastic tubes still hung from the ceiling, IV lines or something like it. But it was the wall that made me stop. Rows and rows of tally marks carved into the cement. Some crossed out, some circled. Beneath them, scratched into the wall with something sharp, were words. I read them out loud without meaning to. This is where they forget us. But I remember. They made us numbers. But I am still Ellie. One day, I will walk home. I didn't realize I'd been holding my breath until I stepped outside again. The sun was rising by the time I got back to my car. I didn't turn the engine on right away. I sat there staring at the trees, holding the notebook from the crate. My hands were shaking. That morning, a manila envelope appeared on my desk. No return address. Inside was a single photo dated October 1994. The buried bus still intact. A girl stood next to it. Ellie. Same clothes as the missing poster. Same notebook in hand. Behind her, a man blurred by glare face obscured. But Ellie, she was looking straight at the camera. Blank expression. No smile. No fear either. I went back through the district archives. Deep storage files no one had touched in years. Most of the cabinets were mislabeled. A lot had been water damaged. But tucked behind a stack of old emergency plans, I found what I needed, a binder marked Bus Route Logs, 1993-1995. The supervisor's copy. Handwritten ledgers, blue ink stamp on each page from Superintendent D.W. Charles. I flipped to September 94. Everything was consistent until the 14th. That's when a new stop appeared. Stop 21X Tunnel Crate Drop. Same entry on the 15th. And the 16th. The day they vanished. I drove straight back to Briar Hollow. I had GPS coordinates from the old maps. The location was real. The ledger wasn't a typo. That stop existed, and it wasn't a road. It was a buried access point. I sent the coordinates to a ground team, marked it for excavation. But I didn't wait. I went in again alone through the same hatch. This time I followed the second corridor, one I hadn't seen before. At the end of the passage was another sealed door, welded shut. Faint red paint above it spelled something out, Red Room. I didn't know what I expected when I finally pried the door open. It wasn't this. The room was clean, intact. Unlike the other tunnel, this one had power. A projector still bolted to the ceiling. 3 child-sized chairs facing a black and white monitor that was still playing static. The walls were lined with padded panels, soundproofing foam stained with water damage. On the far wall hung a corkboard, dozens of photographs pinned in tight rows. Children in uniforms, children strapped into desks, children wired to monitors. On one of the lower pins was a girl, maybe 8 or 9, seated at a table, thin, pale, her eyes wide open, blank stare, notebook clutched in both hands. Next to the corkboard, beneath a red exit sign that led nowhere, I found another spiral notebook. Green cover, identical to Ellie's. But this one wasn't hers. The writing was adult, sharp block lettering. The first page read, Subject 12, Observe only, do not reassign. Possible contamination risk. Inside it was clinical, schedules, punishment logs, behavioral metrics, notes about non-compliance. One line stood out. Subject continues to resist collective behavior assimilation. Displays alarming recall. Attempts to remove notebook unsuccessful. Subject becomes violent when separated from it. Team recommends termination. Supervisor denies. States subject will become control group. Control group. They didn't save her. They studied her. They watched what happened when the program failed to erase someone. I went back through every image, looked closer. In the top corner of one photo, near the edge of the frame, a man stood behind a child, hand on her shoulder. The girl wasn't Ellie, but the man. The suit, the posture, the shape of his jaw. I'd seen him before. Daniel Harrow, superintendent's son, now county commissioner. I didn't go back to the station right away. I stayed in my car with the notebook open in my lap, replaying every interview, every misstep, every moment I'd dismissed as coincidence. Wexler had said the program ended, that Ellie escaped, that no one brought her back. But someone had. Someone with power, access, and motive to keep it all buried. That night I returned to the sheriff's office and requested a meeting with Wexler. He was already waiting, pale, quiet. He hadn't slept. Said someone left an autopsy report on his porch. Calvin Rhodes, the former district mechanic. He'd gone missing just days earlier after I'd requested to interview him. Now he was dead, buried in the same forest where the children had disappeared. They're killing the old lynx, Wexler said. Anyone who remembers too much. I asked him again, slowly, clearly. Did Ellie really make it out? He looked down at his hands. I gave her the notebook. I told her to walk the tracks east. Said I'd come back the next day with a ride out. But when I returned, she was gone. Gone where? He hesitated. I think someone got to her first. The last thing he said before the lights flickered overhead was something I still haven't forgotten. She always remembered. But sometimes memory's not enough. And then barely a whisper. There's more than one notebook. I didn't sleep that night. The evidence board in my motel room had started to look less like a map and more like a warning. Lines connecting names that were no longer alive. Faces blurred in surveillance stills. A case that wasn't getting colder but closer. And somewhere in the middle of it all, a girl who refused to forget. In the morning, a voicemail was waiting. No number, no caller ID, just a faint whisper and static. Stop asking about me. He's still out there. If you want the truth, dig under the school. Then it cut. That was the moment I knew I wasn't chasing a memory anymore. I was following someone who had never left, and whatever they wanted me to find was still buried. The voicemail hadn't said much, just a whisper strained and crackling, dig under the school. No name, no threat, just that one instruction. Dalton Elementary had been closed since '96. Torn drywall, sunken ceilings, broken desks left behind like the teachers just walked out one day and didn't come back. The main hallway still carried the smell of mildew and damp paper. I passed classrooms where books had been left half-open, chairs flipped over. It was quiet, but not dead. The kind of silence that felt like it was holding its breath. I had already reviewed the blueprints. No basement, no substructure. But one maintenance memo from the early 90s mentioned recurring flooding under the cafeteria kitchen, only referenced once, never followed up. It was the only place the plans didn't match reality. I found the door behind the old service line tucked between a rusted pantry shelf and the back wall. Steel windowless. Welded hinges. I pried it open with a crowbar. A staircase dropped into darkness. No lights. No handrail. The air was thick with dust and something sharper, bleach maybe, or ammonia. I moved slow. My boots landed on concrete that sounded hollow. Each step echoed longer than the last. The room at the bottom wasn't large, but it had power. Fluorescent lights flickered to life one by one, illuminating a narrow corridor. On the left, viewing windows, set behind two-way glass. On the right, doors, heavy, reinforced. I tried the first one. Locked. Same with the second. The third opened. Inside, the walls were padded. The floor a rubberized mat with bolts in all four corners. In the center sat a child's chair, metal, with leather straps on the arms and ankles. Above it, a single light buzzed quietly. On the wall behind it, someone had written in red marker, Lesson Room 5, Non-Compliant Subjects Only. The binders on the counter were fresh, dustless. The ink hadn't even faded. Inside were photographs, black and white stills. Children seated in those same chairs, some asleep, some not. One image had a note scrawled in the margin. Subject 12 refused to answer to assigned number. Physical reinforcement ineffective. Audio conditioning recommended. Subject 12, Ellie. I backed out of the room, pulled the door shut, and turned to the hallway ahead. There was one more door at the end marked Control. It opened without resistance. Inside was a narrow bank of monitors. 9 in total, each black. A row of cassette decks ran beneath them, some still loaded with tapes. The first label I saw read 12, Final Week, Segment 4. I hit play. Audio only. At first static, then a child's voice. I remember my name. A pause, then another voice, male, older, clipped. You will forget. Silence. Then the girl again, quiet, steady. No, I won't. The recording ended. I opened the cabinet beneath the console. Inside were 7 tapes, each labeled with a subject number, each followed by final segment. I didn't play the others. The file cabinet beside it was bolted to the wall, but the lock had rusted out. I forced it open. Inside were evaluation reports signed by Dr. L. M. Harrow, not Daniel the father, the former superintendent. One file stood out thicker than the others. Subject 12. Extended observation, pages of logs, behavior reports, psychological summaries. But near the bottom, a memo I hadn't seen before, typed, dated October 17, 1994. Subject 12 is no longer viable for assimilation. Emotional detachment has failed. Memory erasure incomplete. Recommendation: terminate and dispose under seat 20. Bus burial scheduled for October 18th. But the next page, handwritten in the margin and signed again by Harrow, had a correction. Reassign to Watcher Program. Monitor long-term. Field agent to confirm containment quarterly. The Watcher Program. I took photos of everything and called it in. When the team arrived an hour later, the entire sublevel had gone dark. The power lines had been cut. Someone had beat us to it. But the files I'd taken, scanned, backed up, time-stamped, they were enough. It wasn't speculation anymore. It was proof. Proof that the school had never been shut down for mold or funding. It had been decommissioned to cover an operation that shouldn't have existed. Outside, I found tire tracks fresh in the mud. A small set. Narrow treads. Like someone had been parked just beyond the tree line watching. 2 days later, the GBI took Harrow into custody. not Daniel. His father, Lawrence Harrow, 83 years old, confined to a care facility in Fairview. But when they brought in the files, he looked up and said it wasn't supposed to come back. That room was sealed. He didn't deny it, didn't flinch, just said she wasn't like the others. We asked him who else was involved. Names, locations, surviving members of the team. He didn't answer, just stared at the wall and whispered one line over and over. She remembered too much. That's why we buried her. But we hadn't buried her. We'd buried a body. Ellie was dead, but the voice that left that message. The notebook dropped after the rain. The photo left without a trace. Someone else was still out there. Someone who remembered every drill, every code, every corridor. A survivor who never escaped, but was never caught. And in the center of it all, that final phrase on Harrow's memo kept circling in my mind. Field agent to confirm containment quarterly, which meant someone had been checking, every few months, quietly, consistently. And if that agent was still alive, they weren't done. 3 days after Harrow was taken in, the witness came forward. Not to me, to a retired federal agent in South Carolina. She showed up at his back door in the rain, no shoes, no ID, just a name scribbled on a receipt, Reyes. He called me that same night, said she wouldn't give details until she saw me in person. That was the first time I heard her voice, not in a file, not through a recording. Live and quiet. The kind of quiet that only comes after years of being told to stay silent. She said her name was Lauren Giles. She'd been a school psychologist. Hired by the district in '91, transferred from Chattanooga. Said she didn't know what she was part of, not at first. They told her it was advanced testing, educational modeling, behavior tracking for at-risk students. She believed it, until she was handed her first subject log. Said the photo was black and white. The child's name was redacted, but the expression blank dissociated far too still. That's when she knew it wasn't about education. Lauren kept her head down, followed the protocol, took notes. But she started slipping documents into her own bag, one every few weeks. Maps, audio files, internal memos. She said she thought she was building a case, said she planned to take it to the state board once she had enough. But in March of '95, someone beat her to it. An anonymous call. She didn't know who made it. She only knew that the next morning 3 people were gone. 2 aides, 1 janitor. All had worked in the same wing. Lauren fled, used a friend's ID to get out of state, changed her name, went underground. For nearly 30 years, she kept quiet. Said she didn't come forward now because she felt safe. She came forward because she knew she was next. I arranged safe transport to a federal intake center. She handed over a worn file folder. Inside was the first full list I'd seen: names, positions, clearance levels. It wasn't long. 11 names total. 5 were already dead. 2 had vanished. The remaining 4 were local, and one of them was Daniel Harrow. I drafted a formal affidavit that night. Full warrant for search and seizure Harrow's home vehicle office storage unit. It was approved at 3:17 a.m. We moved before sunrise. His property was 30 acres of wooded land, private road, gated entrance, motion sensors on every post. But he didn't run. When we arrived, he was waiting at the edge of the porch. Calm, wearing a dress shirt, hands folded. He said one thing before we cuffed him. Just one. You'll never find the original. In his study, we found 5 VHS tapes hidden behind a false panel, labeled by number, all from 1994. They matched the subjects in the tunnel. We also found a box of burned negatives, shredded transcripts, and 3 red notebooks. 2 were blank. The third wasn't. Inside diagrams, names, dates. One entry read, Watcher protocol suspended, residual tracking still active. Another subject 12 presumed dormant, but if memory persists, initiate last sequence, then the last page. A short note handwritten. She made it further than we thought. If she leaves another message, erase everything. 2 hours into processing the evidence, we got the call. The storage unit was gone. Fire. Total loss. Accelerant was used. Local security cams had been disabled. No footage. But what mattered most had already been secured. Lauren's file, the VHS tapes, the logs from the tunnels. Together it was enough. On August 9th, Daniel Harrow was formally indicted on federal charges: conspiracy, unlawful human experimentation, destruction of evidence, obstruction, and manslaughter. Lawrence Harrow was named a co-conspirator. The Department of Education disavowed any connection to the project, claimed it was rogue, unfunded, never authorized. But the crates said otherwise. The tape decks, the clearance stamps, the modified curriculum reports from 1993 to 1994 marked with federal tracking codes. They knew. Not everyone, maybe, but enough. News broke nationwide by the end of the month. The Knox Hollow program, they called it. The school that erased children. Public outrage came fast and then, like most things, faded. But not for me. Ellie's notebook was still in evidence. I read through it again that week, and tucked into the back flap something I hadn't noticed before: a single Polaroid. Faded, cracked. It showed a dirt road, lined with pine trees. Barely visible in the distance, a figure walking alone. A child. No timestamp. No caption. Just one sentence written in blue pen. You didn't bury me deep enough. We ran the image through every forensic filter we had. Couldn't confirm identity, couldn't locate the source. But the message was clear. Justice came late. Not full, not final, but enough to open the records, expose the names, seal the site. I asked Lauren once quietly if she thought Subject 12 was still alive. She didn't answer right away. Then she said, "I don't know if she survived, but I know she never stopped walking." The tunnel beneath Dalton Elementary was sealed 2 weeks later, welded shut, reclassified as restricted federal property. The trees around it have already started growing back. From the outside, you'd never know what was there. No plaque, no sign. Just another overgrown hill at the edge of a dead school. We never found Subject 12, not her body, not her trail, not whoever left those messages. The team believes she died in that room or on that bus, that the rest was someone else, someone who saw or heard or remembered. But I don't. Ellie's name stayed on my desk long after the case was closed. I kept her notebook in a drawer, not because it was evidence, but because it reminded me what can happen when a town refuses to look at the things it's buried. Lauren's been relocated. New name, new life. She testified in sealed court, gave her full deposition. She said she still hears the tape sometimes when it rains or when she's alone too long. She never asked for anything, just said she was sorry she didn't run sooner. As for Harrow Daniels' trial is scheduled for next spring. He hasn't spoken since the indictment. Not a single word. His attorneys filed for mental incompetence, but the reports say otherwise. He knows what he did. Lawrence died 3 days before formal charges were finalized. Stroke. No confession, no final words. Just a sealed folder passed to his son's attorney. Its contents are still under review. I kept working cases after this, some big, some small, but nothing else ever carried the same weight. Not because of what we found, but because of what we didn't. There are still 9 names we haven't identified. Children. File numbers with no photos, no birth certificates. We think some were pulled from neighboring counties, maybe foster homes, maybe undocumented. The record trail ends where it was designed to. But sometimes late at night I go back through the photographs. Not for new leads. Not for closure. Just to remember them as real. The girl in seat 12 with her head turned just slightly. The scuff marks under desk 5. The red crayon marks on the door frame no one bothered to scrub away. They were children. That's what I keep coming back to. All this planning, all this silence, all this pretending, and in the end it was just children. Taken, erased, left in the dark. We couldn't save them, but we told their story. And maybe that counts for something. If you've listened this far, thank you. For remembering them. For staying with them. For keeping their names from disappearing. If this story stayed with you, consider sharing it so no name gets left behind.